Hello friends, let's have a look at the last couple of books I've been reading, and our theme on this occasion is new ways of engaging with politics. Looking forward to reading the comments on this one. We might as well dive right in. The first book I have to recommend is George Ciccariello-Maher's Building the Commune. I would show you my copy, but I lent it to Badmouse, who is a fellow YouTuber here on youtube.com. This is a book about Venezuela and Venezuelan politics and the last 30 years or so of Venezuelan politics. The only information I really get about Venezuela, generally in my day-to-day life, is from the news. And this book was a real eye-opener for me because it put a lot of what I've heard about Venezuela in a totally different context. The book focuses on Venezuela's communes, who for the last 30 years and before have been building small pockets of independent, directly democratic, self-managing, radical politics. They've been trying to create this environmentally sustainable, directly democratic alternative to capitalism from the ground up. Rather than it just being imposed from the top down, Chavez, it was already kind of going on, and Chavez said, okay, like, we're gonna make this legit and legally recognize it. And this is just, it's an entirely different kind of government from the one I know. Like, I assumed, wrongly as it turns out, that kind of the Venezuelan state was kind of like here. You know, you've got the state and the people, and you know, that's then you've got the police who enforce the will of the state, and that's kind of it, right? But it turns out it's actually totally different from that. There's this whole new system that is being built inside the old one, and the old one is in some quarters like trying to aggressively, bloodily reassert itself, and it's just all a lot more fascinating and complicated than that. So here's a really cool quote which might illuminate it for you. I wrote it down before I lent the book to Badmouse. Building communal power meant dissolving political power into the community itself. It meant a broadening of democracy in which the communities will assume the fundamental powers of the state. This was not mere decentralization, however, the buzzword of choice for the neoliberal reformers of the 1990s who sought to reduce the role of state to benefit not community, but capital. The communal alternative Kleber and Chavez envisioned was never about decentralizing power, but organizing power in the barrios and the country from the bottom up. The neoliberal economic policies that have done so much damage in my country had already been rejected by Venezuela definitively in 1989, and since then this totally new way of doing things has been bubbling up. Sometimes with its drawbacks as well. Ciccariello-Maher is pretty honest and open about saying these have been some of the good bits, these have been some of the bad bits, these are some of the problems that might be on the horizon that people kind of need to come together and overcome. He's very optimistic, but he's very honest and frank as well. In my country, there's this common idea, which I think I still had sort of latently, which is that people who aren't employed in the private sector are dependent on the state. And Ciccariello-Maher says that's just kind of not true, because you've got people in Venezuela who are not employed by the private sector, who are in the cities, but who are building urban communes. They're not dependent on the state, they're actually building their own power in their own communities and sustaining themselves. Still capitalist, not yet socialist, Venezuela stands uncomfortably between two economic systems and two different states, with the contradictions of each reaching a fever pitch. The construction and consolidation of grassroots power from below in Venezuela has been a long and arduous process, stretching across decades. Today, this alternative power emerging from below, this dual power, is seeking out an alternative space in the communes in which to make the long-promised revolution a concrete reality. Ciccariello-Maher himself has travelled to Venezuela, he's spoken to the comuneros and comuneras, he's travelled into the barrios, and he brings their words into this book as well. So it's not just him sort of theorising from the ivory tower, he actually sort of goes down into the world and examines it. I've read another book of his, Decolonising Dialectics. That book was, I've mentioned it before, it's very difficult. This, total contrast, really accessible, really easy. There are a couple of sections where it gets like slightly cheesy, like a little bit romanticized. There's a whole extended metaphor about bees, which is like a page or 2 pages, which is just a bit kind of cheesy, I thought. But it's a real eye-opener. It's balls to the wall. It's out there, and it's a really beautiful description of a totally new way of thinking about politics. Thank you to Sammy Blanchett for sending me this from my wish list. Yeah, it's just really good. I recommend it. And the second of today's pair is Stacie Clifford Simplican's The Capacity Contract. It's about democracy and what the ideal political subject is in political theory, and how that's been shaped by intellectual disability. How people with intellectual disabilities simultaneously define the space in which we engage with democracy whilst also themselves being excluded from it. This book was a double first for me. It's my first foray into formal disability studies, and it's my first foray into critical social contract theory. I've heard of authors like Charles Mills and Carol Pateman, who do a lot of critical stuff about social contract theory and how it's really kind of marketing for something else. I've heard of that and I'm kind of familiar with the basic idea, but I've not really read any of their work. This was pretty difficult. It's a pretty difficult book. It does that thing that some philosophy books do, where they say, this is what my methodology is going to be, and there's like a long section about the methodology, and I'm like, okay, can we start? I just want to start, because it kind of gets a bit much for me personally. And also just some of the things it's trying to say are difficult. It examines some authors in a lot of depth. It examines Locke in quite a bit of depth and Rawls in quite a lot of depth. And she says that we need to be aware of how there are different ways of engaging with politics that people with intellectual disabilities might be trying to do, but because we're used to a certain way of engaging with politics, we might not be seeing that. Again, like Chicarella Ma, she goes out, she interviews people, she talks to them, she describes the encounters she's had. She says how even just people with intellectual disabilities coming together for a meeting in a public place, having a meal, talking about politics and dancing can be a political act. And initially, I was a little bit skeptical of this. I was like, yeah, okay, like that. I understand how that can be a political act, but I was doubting how effective that kind of political engagement would be. I was like, is that okay? That's a political act, but is it really going to bring any kind of substantive change? And then I realized, well, hang on a minute. That kind of social relation, that kind of just existing together in a space, that goes on all the time, enforcing all kinds of political structures today, like MPs going out for drinks, corporate networking events, people socialising with each other, like playing golf together. Like that kind of stuff goes on all the time. That sort of social relation just keeps all the wheels turning. So why shouldn't I also view that as a political act and a kind of socially and politically necessary act when people with intellectual disabilities do it as well? I was very interested in how some of the ideas in this book about ableism might match up with a book I read a while ago, which was called This Chair Rocks by Ashton Applewhite, that was about ageism and how we exclude socially and politically older people as well. Simplicon makes this really good distinction, which I explained in my Hegel video a while ago, between solidarity based on capacity and solidarity based on shared vulnerability. So the conditions under which you say to somebody, you're in my political family. Do you say, you're part of my political family because you're strong, because you're clever, because you're rich, because you're masculine, because you've proved yourself according to some standards? Or do you say to somebody rather, you're a part of my political community because you need food and shelter and love, and I need those things as well? I found that distinction to be really, well, kind of moving in a way, and it's made me, again, like Chicarella Ma, it's made me reevaluate my country and the political communities we have here, and I'm like, are we including people based on capacity or on vulnerability there? So this book really gave me a lot to think about. It is difficult, but if it sounds like something that might be up your street, if you're thinking about picking it up, I would recommend it. I'm going to keep it on my bookshelf. I don't keep everything on this bookshelf, and I think I'm going to keep this one because I think I might want to come back to it later. This bookshelf's getting full. There we go. Thank you to Dustin Timmons, who got me this book off my wish list, and thank you to you for watching. I will see you in the next video that I make. Bye! Patreon.com/philosophytube is where you can support my efforts to give away free education. Please sign up and give whatever you can. It all goes towards helping make the show. Alternatively, paypal.me/philosophytube is where you could make a one-time donation.